Have you ever reminisced how many cars you've owned in your lifetime? Hi, Jim Ziegler, the Alpha Dawg. Laying in bed a couple nights ago, I started to remember some of the cars I've had over the course of my life. Now, Debbie and I, being in the car business, we change cars almost as often as some people change their socks. But I got really nostalgic the other day, and I thought I'd just do a little fun piece on cars that I've owned and the history as I travel along the timeline from the 60s all the way to current times. Let's go back to the very first car that I ever owned. Now, bear in mind, my parents owned a 57 Chevrolet when I was in high school. So I was driving a pretty cool car until one night on a double date, I chose to roll it over and total it. My parents weren't happy. So let's fast forward to 1966, when I bought my first car, the car that I bought myself. The first car I ever bought was a 1966 Ford Mustang. There it is. Matter of fact, that's not the exact one. That's one I found on the internet, but it's identical to the one I had. A 66 Mustang Coupe, 289 cubic inch V8 with a two-barrel carburetor. It wasn't a race car. But that car was so cool in the day. And I was real fortunate. It was called Midnight Blue. That was the very first car that I ever owned. At the time, I was working for the juvenile shelter in Jacksonville, Florida. Yes, I was a child care counselor. I didn't pay much. And so finally, I got another job as an apprentice at the Naval Air Rework Facility. Very few people realize that I'm a journeyman in three trades, three aircraft trades. I'm a journeyman sheet metal mechanic, I'm a journeyman airframes mechanic, and I'm a journeyman heliarc welder. And of course, the last time I worked in any of those trades was back in the 70s. But when the Vietnam War ended, they laid us all off. But for 7 years, I worked at the Naval Air Rework Facility, in the sheet metal trades. And when I did that, I had access to the Navy Federal Credit Union. And I financed my second car. My second car was even cooler than the Mustang. It was a 1968 Dodge Super B. 383 cubic inches, 335 horsepower from the factory. That's a picture of me standing next to it. The one on the left is one I found on the internet, same color. And absolutely incredible car. I love that car dearly, and I got in a lot of trouble with that car. That car cost me a lot of grief. That's me standing next to it. 23-inch arms, 56-inch chest. I was bench pressing 450 pounds. I was a bar fighter and a drag racer. Those are my two hobbies. Every night you'd find me at the Crystal hamburger stand on San Juan in Jacksonville, and I was either booking drag races or getting into fistfights. It was a little different time in my history. Matter of fact, that car, December 27th, 1968, I got caught drag racing. I outdistanced 5 patrol cars. I outran 5 police cars, ran 14 miles in 7 minutes on the radio. And finally, I stopped when they set up a roadblock, and ultimately they took my driver's license away for 1 year. And Judge Santora in court said that I had to dismantle the engine and sell the car, because I had gone to performance engineering in Jacksonville, Florida. Now, bear in mind, in 1968, that car cost $2,800 drive out. That's all I paid for it. That was what they cost. And I went to performance engineering. Stanley Mizell, who at the time was driving the world record Hemi CUDA. So Stanley built the engine. He put a George Schooler cam in it, a Paxton supercharger. We did some things with the transmission. I gave Stanley more than $1,000 to make that car fast, and it was fast. And one of the funniest things, when the judge ordered me to sell the car and dismantle the engine, to revert it back to stock, one of the policemen that was in the chase that chased me bought the car. And he bought all the parts I took off of it and put them back on. So anyway, that's the story of Jim Ziegler and the Dodge Super Bee, one of my favorite cars of all time. So when I sold that car, I didn't have a driver's license for a year. I got a back and forth to work provisional license, but I couldn't drive anywhere. So I bought a 1968 Plymouth Satellite Convertible. This is not the same exact car. This is another one I found on the internet, but the one I had was identical to this. It was white with a black vinyl convertible top, 318 V8, no horsepower. It was just a nice car, convertible. Remember, I was still a single guy, and it was a pretty cool car. Then, the entire time I was working for the Naval Air Rework Facility, I was a part-time DJ at WAPE, the Big Ape, WAPE. I was doing a lot of the character voices on the Jay Thomas Show, and Jay became a famous actor. He passed away a couple of years ago. But anyway, I was a part-time DJ while I was full-time with the Naval Air Rework Facility. And when President Nixon laid off all the apprentices at the end of the Vietnam War, I went full-time radio. And I was doing all the live appearances. I was the promotions director for WAPE. It was owned by Stanley Kaplan at the time. I was the promotions director. I was running vacation shifts, and I was doing all the live broadcasts. I even hosted the Miss Jacksonville pageant as the MC one time. I was doing all the live appearances. I was Dr. X, the big time radio celebrity, and I was also selling radio advertising. And when I was selling radio advertising, I was driving a Chevrolet Caprice Classic. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any photos of that particular car. And the one that I had was emerald green. This one I found on the internet, same year, same model. Notice the fender skirts, nice car. Had a 350 V8. And I used that car to call on clients when I was selling radio advertising. So I was selling radio advertising. I was doing shifts on the air as a DJ, and I was doing live appearances on behalf of the station. So somewhere in the middle of all that, I moved to WIVY radio as a full-time salesperson, part-time DJ. And as a part-time DJ, full-time salesperson, I bought a 1973 Monte Carlo Landau Brougham, one of my favorite cars of all time. A Landau Brougham, I mean, that car was absolutely phenomenal. And I'm going to show you a little picture here. That's me standing next to it in the bottom right-hand corner. Yeah, that's me down there. Long sideburns, long-haired, wearing my velour tux. I was going to one of the pageants or one of the concerts where I was the MC. I was the MC for a lot of the rock concerts that the station brought to town. And that was the outfit I was wearing that particular night. And that's my real Monte Carlo behind me. Now, one thing I want you to notice about the Chevrolet Monte Carlo is that it has swivel bucket seats, bottom left. That was the coolest thing. Now, remember, I'm a DJ. I'm Dr. X, a big time radio celebrity, and I'm also a single guy. So the swivel bucket seats were the coolest feature on the car because I could pick up my date and then swivel the seat and ask the young woman, sit in the seat and I will swivel you into the car. Yeah. A little tacky, but it was so cool. Swivel bucket seats, chocolate brown vinyl Landau roof, every option at that car was absolutely phenomenal. I love that car. But then, by this time, I had moved on to WVOJ radio, the country radio station. And I was no longer Dr. X, the big time radio celebrity. All of a sudden, I'm Diamond Jim Allen because I was wearing a little jewelry in the day. So I'm the cowboy guy, Diamond Jim Allen at WVOJ radio, the country station. But I'm actually a salesperson. I'm only doing live broadcasts. I'm not running much of an air shift. I did a couple substitute shifts, but for the most part, I'm Diamond Jim Allen. And Ricardo Montalban, the actor, was on television talking about the new Chrysler Cordoba. I took one look at that car and I said, that son of a gun is beautiful. I got to get me one of those. So the Monte Carlo's out and I'm in a 75 Chrysler Cordoba. And of course, I never bought a car that I didn't buy every conceivable option, including the Corinthian leather seats. Now, the one that I had was bright red, like the one, matter of fact, I found the picture of this one on the bottom here. I found the picture of this one that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. That's identical to the one I had. That's right. I had a bright red, black interior, vinyl roof, Landau. This thing was absolutely gorgeous. Wire spoked wheels. It had a 360 cubic inch engine. I don't know if it got 9 miles a gallon, but I loved that car. So that was my Chrysler Cordoba. Now bear in mind, it probably wasn't the best quality car, but it was a stunning car. It was absolutely gorgeous. Well, I got in the car business at that time because I got married and divorced the same year that I bought the Cordoba. Yeah, I had a little trial marriage there. And I was wimping out. I quit the radio business completely. I blamed the radio business on the divorce, which was not true. But still in all, I was wimping out. And I got into the car business in 1976. And as a car salesperson, in those days, they gave you free cars. Everybody had a demo. For the next 5 or 6 years, I didn't have to worry. Matter of fact, almost the next decade, I didn't have to buy a car. But there was a point where I dropped out of the car business. I was broke. I was divorced. I was angry. That's my signature story. I'm depressed. I'm sneaking out of my apartment in the middle of the night, 3 days before the rent was due, packing my every earthly possession. There it is, my 1973 buy here, pay here Lincoln Continental. Now, that car, I loved that car. I mean, you imagine the dealer that sold it to me was an independent dealer, buy here, pay here. People with bad credit. I had terrible credit. After the divorce, I didn't pay anybody anything for nothing. I was so feeling sorry for myself. I got in the car business. I was the top salesperson at the dealership, but I still had this underlying thing where I was wimping out about my divorce, and finally broke, divorced, angry. I dropped out. I got this buy here, pay here car. I paid $1,500. Now, that is not the exact one, but that is the exact color, the exact model, Lincoln Continental, 1973 model. That car was 22 feet long. You couldn't see the hood ornament in the fog. I mean, this car, and here I am in the middle of the night, April 28th, 1982. I'm driving that car through the middle of the night to Atlanta, Georgia, up I-75. Didn't know exactly where I was going to live. I knew I was a car salesperson. I knew some people in Atlanta. I'm going to go sell cars in Atlanta. So every earthly possession was in that car with me. My mattresses were tied to the roof. I mean, looked like the Beverly Hillbillies blowing into town. Here I am. I'm out of here. It was more getting out of there than going there, you know? So anyway, I'm headed for Atlanta, Georgia. I'm starting over again. But you know what? When I was driving to Atlanta that night, I made two powerful decisions in the solitude of that Lincoln. Decision number one, I will be a success. Decision number two, I will study my profession as surely as if I were studying for a master's degree in any other profession. I had tried all the professions in the world, and now I'm back to the car business. I'm out of the radio business, and I'm telling you right now, I am committed to being in the car business. And I tell people all the time, forget your side hustle. You want to be a success in the car business, commit to be in the car business and be the best. Study your profession. I'm a high school graduate from the bad side of town. Study your profession. Learn your profession. You know, this is what we do. Do it as well as you possibly can. Be the best you can be for who you are. Now, by the way, I love that Lincoln Continental. The dealer that sold it to me was a friend, and I'm going to tell you the truth. I paid $1,500 for that car. Now, remember, it's 1982. A brand new car was about $12,000. I paid $1,500 for that one. So if I'd have bought a brand new Lincoln at that time, it was probably a $15,000, $16,000 vehicle. That's what they were selling for. But I bought that car for $1,500. Every one of the power options worked. The windows worked, the air blew cold. It was a beautiful car. The interior was immaculate. I wish I had that car today. That car was a stunning car, maybe except for that lime green color, but that was the color I had. And loved that car. It had a 472 cubic inch engine. I mean, if it got 5 miles to the gallon, that might be true. So anyway, I went to work for McNamara Pontiac, and I'm back in demos again. And at McNamara Pontiac in Atlanta, I met my wife, Debbie. She came in looking at Fieros with her younger brother. And don't tell anybody. I took one look at her and I knew. I've been dating other women in Atlanta. I've been working there for a while, but I looked at her and I said, hey, and I talked her out of buying the Fiero, talked her out of it. And then I left McNamara Pontiac and I went to work for Banner Ford in Decatur, Georgia. And at Banner Ford in Decatur, Georgia, once again, I still was driving demonstrators, but I was the F&I manager. You know, they had promoted me to finance and I was setting records. I was getting really well known and I was making a lot of money, an incredible income for the day. You know, I'm making $8,000 and $10,000 a month in 1982. That was unheard of. I mean, I'm cleaning up. Now my credit is still terrible, but Debbie and I are dating. We dated for 2 years before we finally got married. And I sold her a 1982 Thunderbird Elan. Now that's a picture of a similar car. It was black. It was every option that Ford threw in the Thunderbird. It was the luxury version. It was more luxurious than most Lincolns, which was their top of the line vehicle, their luxury vehicle. The Thunderbird Elan. Now, let me tell you the truth. I laid her away. I put her in the ditch. That was like I don't know, $14,000 car or something like that. I made $3,000 front side gross. I I laid her away, and it was a 5-year lease. And then I ended up making every payment myself. Absolutely. I paid all the payments, you know, and because during the time she had that car, we got married, and we were together the whole time. So anyway, that was Debbie's Thunderbird. And then I went to work for Dyer and Dyer Volvo. I worked for Potamkin, and I was the F&I director for the Potamkin stores in Atlanta. I was still setting records. I was making incredible money. And when I left Potamkin, I had an offer from Stovall Nissan in South Atlanta. And I was making unbelievable money. I think the dealer had his hand on the Bible when he said, "I'll never cut your pay plan." Well, 4 months into it, I got called into the general manager's office. And they informed me that I was making too much money because I had made $17,000, almost $20,000 a month, 4 months in a row. In other words, I was on track to make well over $200,000 that year. And I had been making that kind of money at Potamkin. But the point is, they weren't up for paying me $20,000 a month, which is where it was headed rapidly that particular month. So all in all, I said, "Would you be polite enough to give me a ride home?" I left that job. They weren't cutting me back that much, but I never ever in my career stepped backwards. So I came home to Debbie and I said, "Debbie, I have quit my job. We're starting the consulting company that I have been talking about, Ziegler Supersystems." That was 1986. So immediately I met a fellow named Lee Evans, who was an executive for Ford Motor Company. And Lee Evans introduced me to some of the executives at Ford. And the next thing I know, I'm on an airplane flying to Dearborn, Michigan. Well, actually, I flew to Detroit. At the time, 1986, Ford Motor Company was headquartered in the Renaissance Center where General Motors is right now. Ford was headquartered in that, and I can still recall I'm on the 30-something floor. I'm meeting with all the executives of Ford Motor Company, and I came back with 3 deals. First of all, I was consulting the Minority Auto Dealers Program. Ford Motor Company had made a commitment to Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition to have 300 African-American dealers online in less than 5 years. So I became the consultant or one of the main consultants for that program. That was a major contract. That was a major thing. And the parts and service division of Ford Motor Company hired me to be their F&I school. And I was doing videos for Ford ESP service contracts. I was doing all the training videos for Ford. The three deals that I came back with were over $1 million a year my first year in business. We went from 0 to 40 employees overnight. Within a year, I had half a floor of a major Class A building right below Ford's Atlanta headquarters, 1 floor below. I was in the Lincoln Parkway building. I had a classroom in my offices that would seat 100 people. But unfortunately, I still had bad credit. I was making a ton of money. Now, Debbie and I were married at this point. I got married while I was working at Dyer and Dyer Volvo. So we'd been married, and here I am starting the company. We got married in 1984, and I'm starting the company. And I knew some people at North Carolina National Bank. because as an F&I director of the Potamkin stores, I had used their services and I knew all the buyers and the credit supervisors. So I took these guys and this woman out to dinner at 103 West, one of the most upscale restaurants in Atlanta. I'd wined them and dined them. And at dinner, I broke it to them. I've got really bad credit and I need your help. So North Carolina National Bank agreed to finance me on a new Lincoln. Now remember, I've got this major contract with Ford Motor Company. My company is making more than $1 million a year gross revenue. I've got 40 employees, but I can't buy a car. I couldn't get a box of Cheerios with a cosigner. So North Carolina National Bank, friends of mine, they stepped up, they stood up, and they financed me on a 1986 Lincoln Town Car. It was similar to the blue one you see on the center screen. Matter of fact, it was identical to the blue one that you see on the center screen. I'm driving a $20,000 Lincoln, which was the end of the world in those days. $20,000 for a car? Are you crazy? 1986, and I had a car phone installed in it. Cell phones were just coming in. Nobody, you had a cell phone, you had a suitcase to carry the thing in. That's how big they were. But they started installing them on the console in the cars. So here I never had a car that didn't have a hardwired cell phone in it. And they were expensive. My cell phone bill was over $2,000 a month. If I was driving, I was talking. And that was, kind of unusual. It impressed the heck out of people. Hey, I'm calling you from my car. I would always make sure they knew, I'm going to pay that kind of money. So over the years that I was doing business with Ford, I had 9 Lincoln Town Cars and 1 Lincoln Mark 7. That's the Mark 7 up in the upper left-hand corner. Now, by the way, that was Debbie's car. And I think that was maybe 1988. But I had, over the next couple of years, I had 9 town cars. Now, in those days, Lincoln was building town cars that were designer editions, Bill Blass edition, Cartier edition. Now, I was driving the designer town cars. That's a Cartier in the upper right-hand corner. All my town cars, except the blue one, were either white or black. Matter of fact, even when I went to Escalades later on, they were all white or black. I didn't have, well, no, I take it back. I had a couple gold Escalades when they were brand new. But anyway, I was driving those Lincoln Town Cars, and Debbie did not like the Mark 7 Lincoln Mark 7 because it was a 2-door, and we had Zach in 1988. So we had a baby, and opening the door and flipping the seat forward. She didn't like that, so she switched cars. Got out of I wanted her to drive the Ford product, but what the heck? I had that big contract with Ford. They were satisfied I was driving their car and promoting it. So I'm still driving those Lincolns. I had white and black, with the exception of the blue one. They were all white and black. So in the meantime, in 1986, Debbie switched over and got her a BMW 325i. Now, there was a funny story about that car. Now, remember, I had bad credit and I had rebuilt it. I'm driving cars that I'm financing and leasing. But the particular BMW dealership at that time, GE Capital was their main lessor. And GE Capital had really tough criteria to get a lease with them. And even though I had reestablished my credit, the bad credit was still showing on my credit file. They turned us down. Oh man, was I pissed. Because I had really, gone through purgatory, paid for my sins, and the GE Capital wouldn't finance it. I put it on my American Express card. I bought that car on my American Express card for Debbie. Here we got this 325i BMW, little car. Debbie was import minded, so we went and did that. And GE Capital was so embarrassed because by that time I had a lot of clients, I had a lot of clout, and I started telling people, you can't get financed with GE Capital. You could put it on American Express, but they won't approve it. So GE Capital came back and said, we will approve your lease. So about, I don't know, 2 months into it, it became a lease. So Debbie upgraded, staying with BMW, to a 1989 BMW X5 because we had Zachary and she wanted a little more of an SUV, and BMW had introduced this vehicle. Me, I had 9 town cars, 1 Mark 7. I mean, I was driving the top of the line Ford product. But in the meantime, I was in my 40s. And when you're a young guy driving a town car with a car phone in it, you are cool. But when you're in your 40s, you're just another old fart driving a town car, So I started looking to get something a little more youthful. Anyway, so I bought a Ford Explorer Eddie Bauer edition. I went to the dealership and lo and behold, they had one Eddie Bauer Explorer on the lot. This is 1990. Bottom left corner, it was emerald green. I wasn't exactly in love with the color. It grew on me. It had an inline 6, and I'd never had a 6-cylinder vehicle before. I was an 8-cylinder sort of guy, but still in all, that was my first Eddie Bauer Explorer. And loved the car, absolutely loved it. It had a tan interior, all the Eddie Bauer markings on it. And then later on, I got into Eddie Bauer Expeditions. When the Expedition came out in 98, 96, somewhere in there, I had the red one in the bottom corner behind me on this video. That was my favorite. That was the last Eddie Bauer Expedition I had. I had a bunch of them. And matter of fact, my former dealer, Brack Greer at Banner Ford, had me in an Expedition demo for a while because I was consulting his dealership, and he actually put me in an Expedition demo, and I was changing those out regularly. So here I am. I'm a consultant. I've got 40 employees. We are rocking and rolling. I'm driving a lot of Ford product. And eventually I lost the Ford contracts. The F&I school, Ford Credit really wanted that under their wing. They were a little miffed that Parts and Service Division was hiring me to be the F&I school. And at the time, Ford ESP, the service contract, was under the jurisdiction of the Parts and Service Division. When Ford Credit took it back over, I was out. But that was okay because at that time I started getting some contracts from General Motors. I was doing the General Motors minority program all of a sudden, and I'm starting to get some General Motors business. So what did I do? Oh, excuse me, got ahead of myself. All the time I was driving these Ford products, one of my dealers in Springfield, Missouri, Lynn Thompson Cadillac, Pontiac, GMC. I go into Lynn Thompson's dealership one day, and on the showroom floor with theater ropes around it is a 67 GTO. And I looked at it, and it was Lynn Thompson, the dealer's personal car. He gave this car to his body shop and his mechanics and gave them unlimited license to make the car fast and to make it stand up. 1967 GTO, 30 thousandths over pistons, perfect high cam, 510 lift cam, um, a special transmission. This car was fast. Had a Holley 720 carburetor on it, dual line Holley. It was fast. So I'm talking to Lynn Thompson. I said, how much do you want for that car? And he told me the number. And I'm going to make a long story short because I got a lot of other cars to show you. But Lynn Thompson, I traded it out for consulting services. He shipped that car to Atlanta for me. And I had that car for about 3 years. And it was amazing. That beautiful 67 GTO. Now that's me standing next to it back when I had a beard. And notice Zachary was like 4 years old, 3 years old. I would actually take Zachary and let him steer, and I would bring that car off the line, fishtailing and smoking tires. That's where Zach got his love of drag racing, which got him in a lot of trouble a little later on. But I got this 4-year-old, he couldn't reach the pedals, but he could steer the car. And I'm jumping on this car. This car was probably 500 horsepower after Lynn got done with it. So it was super fast. And I got my 4-year-old steering it. We're singing Little GTO. Yeah, you look so fine. 3 deuces and a 4-speed and a 389. Well, it didn't have a 389, had a 400 cubic inch bored over, but still in all, it was a fast car. And my little son, Zachary, he loved that car, and we'd sing that GTO song. And in the bottom left, that's exactly what it looked like. That's not the actual car. The actual car are the top 2 photographs. That was the only pictures I had of the car, but that was the actual car. That's me standing next to it with Zach. I had the GTO all the time. I had these Lincolns. And you say, well, Ziegler, why did you get rid of the GTO? Well, I got rid of the GTO because I've got this vintage car, and we only had a 2-car garage. I couldn't put Debbie's car, her BMW, out in the weather. So the GTO was not going to be out in the weather. So here I've got my expensive ass Lincoln out under the pine trees, getting pine sap all over it. I didn't have garage space for the Lincolns. So my beautiful, expensive top of the line Lincolns are out in the weather under the trees because the GTO was taking up garage space. So finally, begrudgingly, I had to give up the GTO. I had to sell it and move on, say goodbye to it. In the meantime, Debbie's driving the BMW, but she saw one of my employees had a Jeep, Grand Cherokee. Debbie loved the Grand Cherokee. That's a picture of the exact one she had. Had the gold stripe on it. The one she got was a 4x4. It was the top of the line luxury version of the Grand Cherokee. That was the car that Debbie had. Unfortunately, that car ended up, Debbie had an accident. We had an ice storm in Atlanta, and she slid down a hill into a tree, and didn't hurt her, didn't hurt Zach, but we never keep a wrecked car. I mean, the body shop fixed it perfectly, but once it was gone, it was gone. Okay, in the meantime, I didn't have the GTO anymore, but I bought a 1984 Corvette that one of my neighbors was selling. This car only had 15,000 actual miles on it. That's Zach next to the Corvette. Now, I taught Zach to drive in that car. Now, that's a picture of him the day I took him out, and he was driving the car that day. I don't know how old he was, 8, 9, 10, something like that. I have no idea how old he was. Maybe he was 12, but who knows? But anyway, I've got Zach And I took him out to this construction neighborhood where they're building a bunch of houses. So I figured nothing would happen if I had the little kid driving the car. So he's driving the car on public streets in this construction neighborhood on a Sunday, and all of a sudden, all this traffic shows up. All of a sudden, he's driving in traffic. I'm going, holy cow, I could get arrested. And all of a sudden, we're headed out of the neighborhood, but there's no place to pull over and change drivers. Zach actually went out onto a busy street all of a sudden. I mean, we're on a major thoroughfare. Cars are passing him it's 4 lanes. I mean, I'm going, oh no, Zach, it's the first chance we get, we're going to turn off, which we finally were able to turn off. But Zach learned to drive at a very, very young age. And that Corvette had a history too. What happened to that Corvette was kind of interesting. Debbie and I were out to dinner one night with our next door neighbors, and we came back home and the garage door was open and the Corvette is missing. So we immediately, we went looking for Zach. Sure enough, Zach and one of his buddies had stolen that car that night. He was not much bigger than what you see in that picture. And he's out joyriding with his friend in my Corvette. And we found him on a side street, and the Corvette, the transmission is on the ground. I love that Corvette. It wasn't a collector's edition by any means, 1984 model, but I love the car. Zach had dropped the transmission out of it. And we had the car towed, Rick Hendrick Chevrolet. We had the car towed, and I think the estimate was $600 and some odd to rebuild the transmission. Amazingly, Zach had worked for us all summer in my office, and he had saved up exactly enough money to rebuild the transmission. What a punishment that was. And I immediately sold the car. But that was the story of the 84 Corvette. And it was a beautiful car. It only had 15,000 actual miles on it, but rebuilt transmission, we're out of here. In the meantime, Debbie's upgraded to a 2004 Maxima. And I don't know what that was all about, but that was the car that replaced the Jeep. Okay, Zach turned 16. And when Zach turned 16, I did a really foolish thing. I was friends with Jim O'Connor, who was the president of Ford Motor Company at the time. Jim O'Connor and I were great friends. And I called Jim and I said, Jim, Ford has just redesigned the Mustang. They had gone retro and made it look like a 60s model. And they only had 6 cylinders out so far. The GT version of the Mustang was coming out in the second half of 2005, late in the year. I said, Jim, I want to get a Mustang GT. He said, I will build you one special. So anyway, Jim O'Connor, president of Ford, had a specially built Mustang GT, one of the first 5 or 6 off the assembly line. I had it delivered, drop shipped to one of my minority dealer clients. And we picked it up in Athens, Georgia. And I gave my 16-year-old Zachary Ziegler that exact car you're looking at. That's the exact one. That's the one I ordered for him. In less than 6 weeks, he wrapped it around a tree and totaled it. Lesson learned, don't give a 16-year-old in high school a 300 horsepower Mustang. So Debbie's still getting new cars. And by this time, I'm doing business with General Motors. And General Motors came out with a car called the XLR, had a Corvette engine in it. I mean, this car was a two-seater. It was a really nice car. Loved the car. I talked to my friend Pete Gerosa, vice president of Ford. I said, I got to get me one of those. So Pete Gerosa got me one of the very first XLRs off the assembly line. I got one of the first ones. And that's the exact car on the right. The one on the left is just a picture of one I found on the internet. But the one on the right, that's Zach sitting behind the wheel. That's a 2006 XLR Cadillac, Corvette engine. That was Debbie's car for a blink of an eye. Debbie didn't like the car. You know, the car was too small for her. She claimed she couldn't see, you know, the side view. Debbie had complaints about the car, and I got tired of hearing the complaints, you know. So, you know, even though I loved the car, I thought the car was exceptional, we traded it in. And we traded it in on a 2007 SRX. Now, I'm trying to stay in the General Motors line because I'm doing business with General Motors. So Debbie wanted an SUV. She wanted something she could haul stuff in. So we went to the 2007 Cadillac SRX coming out of the XLR, which once again, she didn't like that car. I mean, that car was not Debbie. So we traded it in on the car she loved more than any car she's ever had, her 2007 Mercedes SL 500. Okay, we go from the Cadillac SRX to a $125,000 Mercedes. I mean, we stepped right up to the plate. You know, that's the actual car. That's me driving it, which I very rarely ever got to do. And that's me and Debbie standing next to it. That was Debbie's dream car. She loved that car. And she kept that car until we had grandchildren. And when we had grandchildren, Debbie went with a 2012 Cadillac SRX. She's back in an SRX, but by this time, Cadillac has changed the body style. She really likes the car. And you can haul grandchildren in it. You can haul stuff in it. That was Debbie's. Actually, that was Debbie's last car that she owned herself. You know, I mean, that was Debbie's last car. I bought it for her that we jointly owned. Both names were on the title. And in the meantime, the year 2000 has occurred. I'm going to retrogress a little bit here. I had a total of 7 Corvettes between 2000 and 2007. I had 7 Corvettes, and unbelievable. I had the silver one, I had the blue one, had the orange one. The orange one was really, I got that from Rick Hendrick. I bought most of my Corvettes through Rick Hendrick. The orange one was a 2004, if I'm not mistaken. There's a couple Corvettes, and that blue one I didn't actually have. It's just a picture of one I found on the internet, but all the other ones were mine. The one you see that says "This Man Means Business," that's a 2007 Corvette. I called Mark LeNave, who was at the time president of General Motors. He's now vice president with Ford, but at the time, 2007, Mark LeNave, or 2006, actually, when I made the call, Mark LeNave was president of General Motors. I said, Mark, I really want one of the new Corvettes. He said, Jim, I will build one especially for you. So in Kentucky, they built the Corvette for me. The engineers that built it audited, balanced it, blueprinted it, It was the perfect Corvette, custom built by the president. President General Motors had it custom built for me. I mean, that car, notice the tag said Ziegler, of course. The other tag said Da Man, So now the whole time I had the Corvettes, I was also driving Escalades. By this time, we moved into the big house. We got 4-car garage. I've got more room to store the cars. Debbie's driving what she drives, which is the little Cadillac SRX and the BMWs, but I'm driving my Corvettes. And I had 7 Corvettes in 7 years. I was trading in and out of them. They changed the body style from the 2004. I immediately, I had a couple of that body style. I immediately went up to the new body style. That's the silver one. Then I had the red one. I mean, I was getting in and out of Corvettes left and right. Now, the orange one that you see, the 2004, story about that, I had that one when Debbie had the black SRX, the first SRX. I'm pulling in my garage one day in my driveway, and the garage door opens and the SRX backs out. And I'm in the orange Corvette. And it's Debbie's birthday. I came home early unexpectedly. The SRX is backing out of the garage. And I'm all of a sudden realizing the SRX is headed right toward my Corvette. And I'm bumping on the horn, and the Corvette backed right over the front, or the SRX backed right over the front of my Corvette, wrecked both cars. Guess what? Zach's driving. He's on a learner permit. He backed over the front of my Corvette. I'm sitting still in the driveway. I was livid. And he jumps out of the car. He said, "I didn't see you." I said, "I was blowing the horn." He said, "I didn't hear it." And I looked at my wife and I said, "Was he playing the radio?" Yes, he had the radio at full volume, which I had forbid him to do on the learner's permit. So she had let him turn that radio up to such a high volume that he didn't hear the horn, and wrecked both cars. So you know what happens when we wreck a car? We got out of both of them. And that's when I started driving Escalades. I had 9 of them. In just a little over 10 years, I had 9 Escalades. Remember, I had 7 Corvettes at the same time. So I always owned a Corvette and an Escalade simultaneously. And I started out when the Escalade was nothing more than a rebadged GMC Denali. That's that gold one you see just above my head in the slide here. Let's see, is there the white one up in the top left-hand corner. So anyway, you notice my tag said Da Man. Now, I always had black or white, except the gold one, which was the Denali. Notice I had custom grills, had really oversized wheels, gold package. I mean, all I needed was a rap group and a posse. I loved my Escalades. I drove 9 of them. just incredible. And I was great friends with all the guys at General Motors, and they were getting me special deals on them. One of them, the white one in the upper right-hand corner, that was kind of interesting. That one was John Lund Cadillac in Phoenix. That was my first one of that body style. John Lund in Phoenix shipped that car to me across the country on a flatbed. I mean, he sold me that car, and he was one of my clients, and he shipped it all the way to Atlanta. So a lot of stories with these Escalades. I got pulled over on a profile stop one time in Mississippi by the drug enforcement guys. Debbie and me and Zach were driving to the NADA convention in New Orleans. We're driving through Mississippi on I-10, And the drug enforcement guys, 5 patrol cars pulled us over, profile stop. They were really shocked to see me get out of the car. They weren't expecting somebody that looks like me to get out of that car. Anyway, I had those ice metal wheels or 23s. I mean, I was driving the ultimate pimp rapper car. It was it was a drug dealer car, maybe from the looks of it. Anyway, drove all those Escalades. But then I had knee surgery. I had both my knees replaced. People that know me know that my young life, I was bench pressing 450 pounds. I fell down with 700 pounds on my shoulders one time, stepping out of the squat rack. I stepped out of the squat rack and I went straight down. Both my knees went. Well, I was in my 20s when that happened, and they've repaired my knees, but when I was in my 40s, I had both knees replaced. That's right. I had surgery, and I could no longer get in and out of the Corvettes. I could no longer get in and out of the Escalades. The big cars like the Escalades, that was history. I had 2 artificial knees, and since then I've had both of those knees replaced twice. I'm on my 4th set of knee, or my 4th knees. So anyway, I love my Escalades, love my Corvettes, but I could no longer drive Corvettes and Escalades, and my knees wouldn't do it. Plus, I was weighing 270 pounds. I had some other medical issues at the time. So I traded in my last Escalade, and I'm still doing business with General Motors. So I traded in the last Escalade on a 2011 Buick Enclave. Once again, I got every conceivable option. And you know what? That is a nice car. It's a beautiful car. It wasn't what I wanted, but Cadillac didn't build a car in that class. I wanted a car that size. And at that time, Cadillac didn't have an offering in that size. And I'm still doing business with General Motors. So what I did at that point was I got into the Buick Enclave, and I bought it where I bought most of my Cadillacs. No, I didn't buy that. I bought that one from Jim Ellis in Atlanta, Jim Ellis, Buick GMC. I bought all my Cadillac Escalades through Hennessy. Hennessy sold me all the Escalades, and they actually sold me one of my Corvettes. So anyway, I had the Enclave. I love that car. It wasn't a bad car at all, but I traded it in because by this time, my buddy Mark LeNave is at Ford Motor Company, so I'm following him across over there. I was also friends with Mark Fields, who was the president of Ford. So I went into the Ford Explorer Limited. I didn't get the Platinum model. I got the Limited, every conceivable option. The thing parks itself. It stays in its own lane. It's got all the computerization, 2016 model. And we still have that car. That's the car Debbie is driving today. It's only got like 15,000, 20,000 miles on it because, frankly, we always drive my cars. When Debbie sold the white SRX, it was 5 years old and had less than 5,000 miles on it. Debbie almost never drove it. So Debbie is a very low mileage driver. We still got that Explorer, the one you see on the screen. We still have it, identical to the one you see on the screen. It's got less than 20,000 miles on it. I don't know exactly the mileage on it. I've kept it mechanically fit and sound. It's never had a mechanical problem. I've got a Ford service contract on it. It's a great car, and we drive it occasionally, just enough to keep it running. But that's Debbie's car. Now me, this is my current ride. I really wanted a Lincoln Aviator. When Lincoln announced they were coming out with the Aviator, I said, I got to get me one of those. I was driving the Ford Explorer. I said, I got to get me a Lincoln Aviator. It's the same size as the Explorer. It's exactly what I'm looking for. It's the size of car I want. I can get in and out of it. But when they announced the Aviator, they couldn't produce the car. That car was over a year late coming out. They started advertising it. You knew it was coming out. So one day on a Sunday, I called Mark LeNave at home. I've got him on cell phone. Mark, you know, I have always driven domestic cars. I've never bought an import in my life. Debbie buys imports. I drive domestic. And I got to tell you, Mark, you're over a year, maybe a year and a half late bringing out the Aviator. You've been telling me that car was coming out. You've had problems getting it launched. Mark, I just bought an Audi. That's right. I bought the top of the line Audi 2019 model that I'm driving now. And you need an engineering degree to drive this car. I'm telling you, it's got more gadgets than the law allows. Twin turbos. This car will get up and get it. Well, that's what I'm driving right now. So I'm sure I didn't tell you all the cars we've owned. I probably forgot one or two of them with this trip through memory lane. And Zachary, we have bought Zachary at least 20 cars. He's only 32 years old. So his current vehicle is a Ford F-150 pickup truck with all the doodads. We bought that. We have probably bought Zach 20 cars. He's had Hyundais, he's had Fords, he's had Chevrolets. He's had the whole gamut. Zach has had at least 20 cars that we bought for him through the years. And I didn't even list all of those. I showed you one. I showed you his Mustang because I thought that was kind of special. Anyway, what kind of cars have you had? When you comment on this little trip I ran through memory lane, tell me what you had, what you love. Show me some pictures. Love to see it. Anyway, this is Jim Ziegler, the Alpha Dawg. Thanks for watching, and stay safe, stay healthy.